Do you want to get better at chess? Simple question. Do you have games where you get to the end and you go, that game kind of slipped through my fingers and I don't really know how? Okay, so what I'm going to do in this video is show you how to analyze your games afterwards in order to improve. Here's the bottom line, guys. Practicing chess can help you improve, but it's actually quite a slow process. Because let's say you just play game after game after game after game, you will over time learn to spot things that you weren't spotting before. Right? Just through repetition, just through practice, just through immersion. But there's the shortcut to spotting things that you didn't spot before, whether it's opportunities to attack, opportunities to gain an advantage over your opponent, or the ability to spot threats before they become deadly, right? The shortcut to doing that is to get the computer to help you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a game that I played in the early hours of this morning, and which I really, really enjoyed playing. It felt like one of the most exciting attacking games that I've played in a long, long time. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through it twice. First time I will walk you through it, and I'm going to then be looking for opportunities for to spot things that I didn't spot during the game. Okay, now if I just keep playing these same games against the same kind of rated people, then why should I spot things that I couldn't spot today, tomorrow, or the next day, right? I'm not going to. I'm just going to be practicing playing at the same level. So to improve, what I need to do is I need to enhance my ability, increase my ability to become aware of the things that I'm not aware of right now. Okay, so let's go through the game. So here's the game, and I'm playing with the white pieces. My opponent is rated 1309, so 100 points lower than me. So I decide to go for a risky and exciting opening, and I decide to play the Danish Gambit. Okay, so this starts with the center game, so e4, e5, and then d4. Center game accepted, e takes d4, then I follow up with c3. This won't be a lesson in the Danish, but obviously it's relevant. D takes c3, and now I don't even recapture. Now I offer up yet another pawn, using the fact that my opponent is spending moves, gobbling up pawns, to get a development advantage in the game, which I hope I'll be able to convert into serious pressure and a win. My opponent now declines pawn number 3 and stays with his 2-pawn advantage. If he'd have captured, I would simply have recaptured with a bishop, so I'd have got my pawn back and developed a piece, and the bishop would now be on a very nice and dangerous diagonal. So my opponent here brings his queen out to f6, and I play a natural continuation in the Danish, which is queen to b3. So now my queen and my bishop are lined up against f7. d6 is played, and now I bring my knight out. Whenever the queen comes to this square or this square, then that's attractive for this knight from b. It goes to c3 and then to d5. And what it's doing here is, first of all, it's hitting the queen on either of those squares, but the other thing is it's looking at c7. And knights love to go to c7 with a fork on the king and the rook. So my opponent needs to respond to this threat at some point, but immediately plays b6, which at the time I thought that's a really odd move. I think one thing that I missed at this point is that maybe I could have played bishop to d5. Maybe I thought about that and then thought actually c6 would just follow. c6 defended by the knight, and I've gained no advantage. Right, he's just pressed up. So I decide to push ahead with my original threat, kicking the queen and also attacking c7. Now clearly the queen, there's only 2 squares the queen can go to defend that square, and this one's covered by the knight, so the queen is forced to go back to d8. And now look at the situation. I've got 2 minor pieces and a queen out on the board. I'm 2 moves away from castling kingside if I want to, and black still has every single one of his pieces on their starting points. So it's actually a very, very promising start. I develop knight to f3, I'm preparing to castle, and light square bishop comes out to attack my knight. That's not really a problem. I go ahead and castle. So now I've practically completed development. I've got 1 minor piece left in the starting block, so it needs to come out into the game, and I'm feeling very good. So c6 is now played, kicking the knight away. Knight comes back to attack the bishop and maybe open up the king side. So the bishops are swapped off. Still looking pretty reasonable for white. Another pawn move, b5 now. So I just drop my queen back, keeping my queen on this nice diagonal pointing to f7. There are possibilities of maybe, if the knight comes around, this bishop could then come up here, and no, this knight can go there maybe. Yeah, if the knight comes here, the knight can then come into g5 with a threat of queen then taking on f7. Queen comes out again to f6, and I just lift my bishop off the back rank to connect my rooks together. And now we're looking pretty good. Now, the one key thing that I know with the Danish Gambit is I've given up 2 pawns. It's now 1 pawn. In order to get the full benefit of my advanced development and my speedy development, the key thing is to stop my opponent from castling. In games where you manage to achieve that, it's generally very, very good for white. So that's something that I know, but it's something that I didn't manage to achieve in this game. So at this point now, I bring my knight from f4 to h3. Okay, where it's kind of acting as my king's bodyguard to some degree, and it also opens up an attack on this knight here. So if the queen ever moves away and my bishop captures, he'll be forced to recapture with a g-pawn, then completely messing up his pawn structure and his king safety as a consequence. So knight comes back to h3. Now he develops his bishop, and now I think I've run out of ideas of how to stop him from castling. The queen is also still defending the knight there, so exchanging my bishop for that knight doesn't really make sense. So what can I do? So I attack the queen. Queen moves aside, and I push a pawn forward. Right? I'm just trying anything I can do now to distract my opponent from his intention of castling, but he goes ahead and does it anyway. Right? So now I'm a pawn down, and these last 4 or 5 moves have really just allowed black to develop most of his pieces and to castle. So it feels like my lead in development has kind of evaporated to a degree. I bring my rook across to the semi-open d file. d6, d5 is pushed, and now I attack the queen. The queen actually doesn't have that many squares where it can go to. Can't go to any of these. Can't go to any of these. Can't stay where she is. And can't go to here or here or here. So there's not many squares left for the queen. So queen goes to f5, and now I bring my knight back again to h3. Black develops his final knight and completes development. Now I come in again with another knight. So basically I've managed to move the queen from g6 to f5. Come in with another knight now, and this comes with a fork, so I'm hitting the queen and the pawn there. And black takes the pawn that I've just undefended. So I've done 2 things here. This pawn in the previous move was defended by both the knight and a bishop, and putting my knight there removes both defenders with 1 move, which is quite something. Okay, so now at this point I should probably, maybe I should have taken that pawn there on c6, hitting with a fork on the queen and the bishop, but I decided to move my rook across and kick the queen 1 more time. The queen now moves to d6 in a place where it is now defending the pawn, so I can't capture it, which is an annoyance. So I lift my other rook from d1 to d3, and now black starts to come up with his own ideas. The obvious threat is queen takes h2, winning a pawn, forcing the king to here, and breaking open my defences. So I can't have that, so I move my knight back again. You can see how my knights have moved forwards, backwards a few times now. For, you know, on all that time, my opponent has been improving his own position. So this knight is a threat, but I'm quite happy that this knight's now covering h2. This knight is also defending f2. So I'm feeling fairly secure down there. And now, here's something that I missed. So by bringing my rook up next to my queen 2 squares away, of course you always need to be looking for, well, 2 things really. The classic knight fork, where a knight comes in and forks both pieces. And the other one could be potentially a pawn fork, where the pawn creeps up and hits both pieces as well. So 2 threats, you know, and that's the kind of patterns that we need to be thinking about developing. Right? So when I'm going through this game now, I need to say to myself, yes, of course, I have to remember that pattern. Putting high value pieces 2 squares apart, you have to check for the risk of forks from knights and pawns. So here I actually come up with a really good move, a really good response. So this is like a counter attack. So now if black captures my queen, so I'm pinning the knight against black's queen. I capture black's queen, maybe bishop takes and then pawn takes or rook takes knight, and black decided that particular exchange wasn't going to be in his interests. So now he moves his queen across here to f6 and now has 2 attackers on this rook, has the knight and the queen. So I snatch the knight and bishop recaptures. I bring my queen down to a position where it's defending both this rook and this knight and this rook. Just want to secure my position here. Now queen comes across, hitting b2. The knight's okay, it's defended 3 times. So I just lift my rook up. And you can see something else that I'm doing here now is I'm putting my pieces, where possible, on light coloured squares. And the reason is because black has only a dark squared bishop. The light squared bishop has come off the board, so that kind of makes it easier. Towards the end of the game, when your opponent's only got 1 bishop, that means that there's only half the board that piece can actually play on. Rook comes across now, threatening my defender of b2. So I simply move it across, I get out of the threat, and at the same time I'm now attacking the bishop. Queen comes across to back up the bishop. Also now looking again at h2, so I need to make a decision. The knight is still defending h2, that's kind of okay, so I need to just be careful that knight can stay where it is. This is a prophylactic move, a3. I just want to limit this bishop's options, and also I notice that if I can play b4, this bishop is going to have to move back, and again has fewer options. Rook comes forward to e6, and I play b4, just nudging the bishop back there. Now I play my knight in, so I'm doing a couple of things here. I'm kicking this rook, but I'm also eyeing up the h7 square. The rook moves across. There's a danger now of, for example, rook takes knight, and then if I just happen to recapture, bang, the queen might come in, so that could be dangerous. So here I now decide to, in fact, what I notice is here that if rook takes knight, I have knight takes knight, so I've replaced one knight with another knight, still defending h2, it's not too bad. But I decide to go ahead and push g3 finally. I could probably have done that earlier on in the game, so I'm making a little dark square pyramid here, which is pretty well protected against a dark squared bishop, can't get through the gaps. And now, yes, h6 is played, now kicking my knight away. So I bring my knight back yet once again to h3, and I wasn't sure about this move. I didn't really get the point of this move. So with d4, black has now blocked his own bishop's attack. His bishop was in line with my king. This pawn was pinned. But by playing this move, he's now unpinned his own pawn. Now unpinned my pawn. And here I notice that I've now got 3 attackers against 2 defenders on that square, so I can go ahead and grab that pawn. Bishop takes, rook takes, now forcing the queen to have to do something. Queen moves across, and now I also grab the knight. So this is actually a rook fork. Now I grab the knight, now I'm slightly ahead in material. Pawn comes down to kick the rook, rook comes back in line on the d file with the queen, and I should be in a decent position, but here, of course, queen now comes in and captures the rook. What I should have done, of course, now is I should have played my rook to h4, where it's attacking the pawn and defending the knight and potentially opening up ideas for a checkmate down the h-file. But it being like silly hours of the morning, I missed that. Very easy to make mistakes straight after you get an advantage in a game of chess. So I've still got 12 minutes on the clock, I should have taken my time. So here we're now back again to a situation where I'm 1 pawn down. This is a nice move, I like this. Rook comes back to the square where it should have gone in the first place, to h4. So now we have a fork. The rook is attacking the queen and attacking the h5 pawn. Queen comes away, and I grab the h5 pawn, not with the rook, but with my queen. So I'm now thinking, hey, we're in line for a nice checkmate sometime soon. Black has other ideas, realizes that he can just slide his rook across to h6, and I have to respond. So I move my queen back, and now this opens up the idea of 2 possible exchanges. We've got rook captures, queen captures, or we've got queen captures, rook captures, and we actually go for the first one. So black captures with a rook, and I recapture. Queen comes in with a check, not a problem. King goes to g2. Queen comes back onto the light squares. It's good for the queen to be on light squares because my king is on light square. And there are light squared diagonals pointing towards my king. I now push my rook forward, so I'm wanting to renew this checkmating idea, which would be actually quite difficult to stop. I think, how's black going to bring his rook round to defend? I think even if he put his queen there, rook comes in, queen's going to have to move. So this is looking like, again, I have the advantage. It's been a real arm wrestle, this game. Really made me think, really enjoyed it. And now the game actually ends with a blunder, unfortunately, because it was a really good one. Black moves his rook over to d8, and it's actually in line with my queen, so I grab that, and my opponent resigns. Okay, so that was my own personal, very quick analysis of the game. What I want to do now is switch across to the computer analysis on chess.com and see what the computer has to offer. Now, this is a very, very, very important point. Computers calculate chess very differently to humans, right? There are several differences. For one thing, this is currently set to looking 15 moves deep. I never look 15. I don't think it's possible for my brain at my age to look at that depth. That's why computers play chess better than we do. Another major difference is that computers don't really have strategies, right? All they can do is just look at the possible moves and figure out the best path. And they also don't understand psychology. So sometimes, for example, I might make a very rapid move, or I might do something in order to distract my opponent or to try and trick my opponent, because I know that humans are fallible. When computers figure out the continuation of if this, then that, etc., they tend to imagine that their opponent is playing very accurately, right? And humans don't always play very accurately, particularly at our level, right? For beginners and improving players, we don't always find the best moves. So the computer kind of assumes that its opponent is always going to come up with the best moves. So this is my advice for when you're analysing your games using the computer. Your goal is not to try and be Stockfish or whatever the engine is, right? You're never going to do that. Your goal is to find, and we're going to look at particular areas in the game, right? Your goal is going to be to look for turning points in the game where the computer thinks you had an advantage, for example, and you blew it. You lost your advantage for some reason, and just to focus on those key areas, I think is the important one. So this is what I wanted to look at, right? We've got this the map of the advantage throughout the game. Okay, so here it says that I'm nearly 5 pawns in front. So there's a few places in that game where I had a significant advantage. So what happened? And there's some few places in the game where my opponent likewise had his own advantage. So what we're going to do is we're going to play through. When it says book move, when it says best move, good move, excellent, whatever, that's not too important because I know these moves anyway. Okay, this is one. This is a questionable move by my opponent, and now if I click on analysis, we're going to say, right, why was it a questionable move? Okay, so it says that taking the pawn was best. That would have suited me just fine. I didn't mind that. But it says that the problem here is it allows knight takes c3, which is what we actually played in the game, isn't it? No. So I brought my bishop out. Yeah, it still wanted me to play knight takes c3. They both look alright. It says d6 is good. We're kind of even. Now I capture on c3 because I wanted to line these up and create a threat that my opponent had to be thinking about. Okay? Remember, people think differently to computers. And now it says that b6 is an actual mistake, and this is where I jump up to nearly 5 points in front. And why? Because it's saying that knight to d5 is a threat, and that's exactly what I played. Knight to d5 is best. Okay, I still have this advantage. Queen has to come back to d8. We figured that out. That's fine. And now knight to f3 is a mistake, and it says, and these are the key things, it says that I should have taken on b6. Right, why should I have taken on b6? Well, let's look. So it's saying knight takes b6 and then c takes b6. All right. Oh yeah, and now getting my knight out of the way, I would have had that. Okay, which it's saying is the best move. Okay, so let's just wind that back a bit. Okay, the queen has to retreat back to d8, and here it's saying I could have captured a pawn. Right, let's say c recaptures. Now black has an isolated pawn on the d file, and then I get to play bishop takes f7 check, forcing the king to come out. Okay, so what have we done? I've given up a knight, and in return I've gotten 2 pawns. Right, so I'm only 1 pawn down, but also I've given black an isolated pawn, and I've caused black's king to have to move. And I think forcing your opponent's king to move and losing castling rights is roughly worth about a pawn. So now I understand what the computer spotted that I failed to spot. Okay, and having worked through that thought process for myself, there is a chance now that I'll be able to spot opportunities like that in future games when they come up. Okay, what did I miss? Okay, so what I missed here was that after the queen had to move back there, I could still have gone ahead. So basically, if I move my knight out of the way, this threat that I lined up earlier on in the first few moves becomes real again. And where should the knight move to? Well, it can't really move there because the queen will just grab it. And then the queen defends f7. That's not good. If it goes there, again, the queen grabs it and the queen defends f7. Not good. I could just move it generally, vaguely out of the way, but then this threat is gone, and the queen can just move back to either of these squares. All right. So again, not very interesting. But this one as an idea, you know, it seems like one of the least obvious, but it comes with a threat. It's a forcing move, right? It comes with a threat of knight's going to take the rook. So it's a forcing move, therefore black has to respond. Okay, and he's got two options. For some reason the computer says that recapturing with a c-pawn is preferable. I'm not sure. I mean, it leaves 3 pawn islands and an isolated pawn, but that's what the computer says. But either way, whichever pawn he takes with, bang, this is going to come in. And then the king's going to have to move, right? And the computer says d7 is the best move. And yeah, I get it. Another great... oh, yeah. Here's the other cool thing about it as well. And this is quite common when you've got your queen and your bishop lined up. I could have then just grabbed that knight. Because rook can't recapture. Because, look, queen recaptures and we're miles ahead. Yeah. So there you go. That's a pattern that I missed in the game. And is this beyond my ability to figure out? No, because I just figured it out. But I needed the computer to say, you missed something, look at it again. Go back to it, look at it again. Right? And that's how you get the edge. That's how you improve your chess thinking game after game after game, rather than just starting a new game and playing the same level of chess over and over and over again. Right. So it says this was a mistake. I get it. Yeah. Maybe this opportunity disappeared, but actually it now says that for black to bring his bishop out was a mistake. Okay. Now what did I do? Castling. That's another mistake. So it's saying I should have played knight to g5. Okay. Let's try and figure out why knight to g5. And this puts me again like 4 pawns ahead. And you can see here that you know, I do understand that because I'm playing this gambit opening, and I said before, I know that it's important to prevent my opponent from castling. So I knew that these kind of the moves where I kept moving my knights backwards, I knew that was against the idea of the opening. But that was all I could think of at the time. So what I'm doing now is I'm discovering, okay, here are some other ideas. Knight comes out. Obviously, knight's protected by the bishop, so the queen can't capture. And I'm threatening to capture that bishop there on e6. Now, and that would have caused the pawn to move, and then the king's security is questionable. Maybe it would have prompted the bishop to capture there, but then when knight captures, I'm attacking the rook again, would probably have prompted another pawn move. I kind of get it. So it's saying that c6 would be the next move, and then that I should have played bishop f4. Bishop f4. No, it's not. Now it's saying that would be a mistake. Okay, it's saying knight takes e6. All right. So, okay. So he's attacking my knight. I can then attack. I can capture the bishop with an attack on the queen and black's bishop, which would force black to have to move or capture. So he would capture, and now, yeah, this king is starting to look a little bit naked and afraid in there. And then knight to f4, I can simply move my knight back, and it's saying yes, I'm in a much stronger position. Okay, so let's go over that one again. What did we miss there? When this bishop comes out, it's saying I should have increased the pressure. Yeah. If you think about it as well, black has only got 1 piece in the board to my 4. Right? I've got a huge lead and advantage. So when that 1 piece comes out into the board, if I attack that piece or capture it, then I'm leaving black with all of this. You know, I did say during the game that one of the issues is that I made these kind of backwards and forwards moves, and I allowed my opponent to develop and castle, and that's why it ended up very close, right? So this is what I'm learning. Okay, in a situation like this, look for ways where you can just keep piling on the pressure, and I didn't do that. And then even if there's a counterattack, I can capture with a threat, My opponent then has to do something about it, and I can just move out of the way. This pawn's now got 3 attackers on it, and my opponent hasn't castled. I'm 1 move away from castling. I've only got 1 piece left to develop. Yeah, I can see why, with that explanation, it's a serious advantage. Okay, let's move on. This is what's played in the game. Let's go back to, okay. Is this the actual game? Let's just check. Okay. I don't think I did that in the game, did I? Let's just make sure we're back to normal. So we'll play through. Okay, so it's saying, yeah, that's an inaccuracy. Okay. Then there's an exchange. It still says I'm slightly better. Right, so we're back in the main line now. Okay, pawn comes, that's good. Queen comes back, excellent. And again, queen back to f6 is a mistake. Right, now, what did I miss? So it's saying, the computer is saying now that a4 is what I should have played. Why a4? The knight's defended. It's not really a problem. This pawn's kind of pinned. I don't want the queen to take that. Why a4? So it says then b4, and then queen takes b4. Okay. Knight comes to d7. Rook to d1. Yeah, I don't really get that. So I think I might write that up as one of those situations where maybe if I took a bit more time to work it through, that might help. Okay, so let's go make sure we're back on the main line of the game. Okay, we get this errors. Yeah, and the queen out there is saying was an error, and that he should have played the knight out to there. Okay. So I've still got a good advantage. It's saying now a serious mistake, and I'm well ahead. And it's saying now I should have played my rook from A to E1, and then probably just gone charging in. Yeah, because now this pawn, if it's backed up by a knight and a rook, could have caused some real trouble. So go there. If pawn takes, I've got rook takes right in front of the king, causing some headaches. But that is a blunder. So I've gone down from 6 in front down to just 1. What should I have done? Rook A to E1. Okay. When your goal is to keep applying pressure, yeah, you want to stop your opponent from castling, make the most pressuring moves. I knew, and I said during my own review of the game, that moving that knight back looked like a mistake. There was no real reason to do it. I didn't have to do it. The knight was defended by the bishop there. So I should have been considering, okay, what are the most pressurizing moves, and probably moving one of my rooks in front of my opponent's king and then throwing a pawn up the board would have been a good idea. So I think we'll leave it at that point. Right? We don't have to go through the entire game. What I want is to encourage you to use this process to go through your games, but you don't want to look at every single move. You don't want to look at everything that it says is an inaccuracy necessarily. What I want you to do is to look for the key moments and just learn from the key moments. Right? When did the advantage slip away? When did your opponent's advantage slip away? Right? When does it say you should have done something really important and failed to spot it? Because you're not going to learn loads and loads and loads and loads. You need to, what we're looking at here is we're looking at refining the edge. Okay, where is the edge of your thinking? Where is the limit of your chess thinking right now? And then use the computer just to push you a little further, just one step further, one step deeper, one pattern that you don't know yet, that you haven't really got your head round and internalized. Just one thing here and there, and that's how you're going to improve. Right? You're not going to improve as quickly by playing the same kind of games in the same kind of way over and over again. So the computer's there, use it, but don't be a slave to it. Let it work for you. And from each game, just try and figure out, yes, good idea. I'll remember that next time. And make sure you do. See you next time.